Morning and good evening, and welcome to our spotlight session on regional partnerships and how they can help advance energy sector priorities. I'd like to thank the ADB for the opportunity to be here today and to moderate this session. I'd like to thank all of you and all of our panelists for joining us to learn more about this important topic. My name is Mark Dunn, and I'm the program manager for the USAID Southeast Asia EDGE Hub project, which is implemented by Tetra Tech. I'm pleased to be joined this morning by a group of experts representing the international donor community, international development finance institutions, and non-governmental organizations, all of whom are deeply involved with the energy sector in this region. I think that we all recognize that given the tremendous need for investments to develop the necessary energy infrastructure, provide reliable and affordable energy access for all, respond to the COVID-19 crisis, and meet NDCs, that no single country or stakeholder is able to operate independently. Collaborating with partners is critical to ensuring the sustainable transformation of the energy sector to meet the needs of the region. My fellow panelists today, made up of representatives from the governments of Australia, Japan, and the United States, along with the Rockefeller Foundation, will discuss ongoing efforts to support these needs, including the goals, the objectives, priorities, upcoming investments, and how governments in the private sector can access these resources to accelerate sustainable, inclusive growth through energy transformation. In the interest of time, rather than getting into too much detail on the speakers' backgrounds, I direct you to the speakers section of the ACEF platform to see their full bios. And for the audience, I encourage you to submit questions to these panelists throughout the session. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the spotlight session where the panelists will be able to respond to the questions that you may have for them. With that, I'd first like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Stephen Olive, the Mission Director of the U.S. Agency for International Development's Regional Development Mission for Asia in Bangkok, Thailand, who will provide some opening remarks and set the stage for the rest of the discussion. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. I'm delighted that you're the moderator for this event. Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. On behalf of the United States Agency for International Development, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome all of you to the Spotlight session on regional partnerships to advance energy priorities at this 16th Asia Clean Energy Forum. Before I begin, I'd like to thank our friends and colleagues from the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, from Export Finance Australia, from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, the Rockefeller Foundation, the United States International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC, for their support in co-organizing this event and for their long-standing partnership with USAID to advance energy priorities in the region, and the Asian Development Bank. Today's event is taking place amidst the COVID-19 crisis and the imminent threats of climate change. Both COVID-19 and climate change present similar challenges. They expose the inequities and vulnerabilities in countries across the globe. They pose existential threats to society, to human health, and our way of life. At the same time, they have highlighted the importance of cooperation. As President Biden said during the Leaders' Summit on Climate, no nation can solve this crisis on their own. Similarly, the clean energy transformation is an endeavor that no country can achieve alone. COVID-19 has changed the way we work, which is obvious from the virtual nature of this event. Thankfully, USAID and the US government benefit from having a long-term, strong relationship with our partners across the region. We build on our diplomatic work through government-to-government, energy dialogues, and private sector engagement. And we are partners with countries and organizations with similar values and mandates. USAID programs are based on the country's priorities, including improving utility performance, scaling up advanced energy technologies, and promoting increased regional energy trade. For example, in Vietnam, where the demand for energy is expected to more than double by 2030, USAID is working with the Ministry of Industry and Trade to implement a renewable energy direct power purchase agreement mechanism. This allows power consumers to contract directly with renewable energy developers. Dozens of companies in Vietnam, including businesses like Apple, Nike, and GE, have partnered with USAID to support this initiative. USAID provides specialized expertise to ASEAN's Center for Energy as part of ASEAN's Interconnection Master Plan Study, or known as AIMS-3, which facilitates power trade across countries and increase energy access. By working together as a regional energy market, we are building secure systems ripe for future investment. The United States works in partnership with other like-minded countries to advance our shared vision of a prosperous and free Indo-Pacific region. Our partnership with Japan is a great example. We have aligned the commitments made under the Japan-United States Clean Energy Partnership with the US government Asia Edge Initiative, or Asia Enhancing Growth and Development Through Energy. As a result, the United States and Japan are working together to promote regional power trade, renewable energy development, and power market reform through the Japan-US Mekong Power Partnership, also known as JUMP. Similarly, our colleagues at DFC just last December signed a memorandum of understanding with the Rockefeller Foundation to promote and distribute renewable energy around the world. As part of this partnership, DFC will invest up to $2 billion in distributed renewable energy, and the Rockefeller Foundation will provide up to $50 million to de-risk DFC investments. Through our Mekong Safeguards program, USAID is interested in continuing to build partnerships with other like-minded partners, including those joining us today. Through this work, we will continue to promote quality energy and transport infrastructure for the lower Mekong region. These are just a few examples that I'd like to highlight. And today, you will hear more from our distinguished panel on what resources are available to both governments and the private sector to help advance your energy priorities in the region. So in closing, let me say that USAID and our partners here today want to use this opportunity to learn from all of you. Please get in touch with us, talk to us about policy and financing challenges and how we can improve these partnerships and programs to respond. Take the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists throughout the whole session. Your active participation and feedback will allow us to take advantage of the wealth of expertise and experience represented with us here today. I wish you all a very successful event. Thank you for your time and for your participation, and I look forward to our future partnerships. Thank you, and back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Steve, for your remarks and setting the scene for this session. Certainly a lot going on, and we look forward to hearing from everyone else. At this point, we'd like to have each of our panelists provide some opening remarks to discuss priorities and partnerships they have in the region. I'd now like to turn to Amanda Vandendoel, the Energy and Infrastructure Team Lead for USAID's Regional Development Mission in Asia, in Bangkok. Amanda?
Hello and good morning. My name is Amanda Vandendoel, and I'm the Energy and Infrastructure Team Lead for USAID's Regional Development Mission for Asia, or RDMA's Regional Environment Office. I've had the privilege of working on energy issues for USAID for the past 7 years, first in South Africa with the US government's Power Africa initiative, and now with RDMA supporting regional energy efforts across Southeast Asia. Although the last year has been extremely challenging for all of us, including here in Southeast Asia, We've made significant progress to achieving the goals under Asia Edge, including continuing to modernize utilities, improving transparency and the value of energy procurements, building capacity for regional energy trade, and increasing the adoption of cutting-edge technology. We've also developed a new 5-year regional development cooperation strategy for RDMA. Through this strategy, we have reiterated the priority of working with regional partners, elevating Thailand's role in the region, and amplifying the work of our USAID bilateral missions. We've specifically identified strengthening regional energy systems as a key objective in achieving a more resilient, inclusive, and secure Southeast Asia. Through our Clean Power Asia Regional Energy Program, which is closing out this month and has been highlighted in many previous ASEF events and sessions, we've mobilized $7 billion in clean energy investments to bring almost 10 gigawatts of solar and wind projects to financial close. We did not do this alone, and we could not have done this without partnerships. Our team in Laos worked with JICA to coordinate and harmonize energy master planning efforts, which will help to increase regional energy trade and access. Through our Advanced Energy Partnership for Asia, working with the US Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, we've launched an expanded version of the Renewable Energy Data Explorer using data collected by the Japanese Meteorological Agency. And through our Mekong Safeguards Program and through USAID Washington's Water Energy for Food Grand Challenge, we're coordinating with partners like Australia and the Rockefeller Foundation, who are featured on this panel today. Our Enhancing Equality in Energy for Southeast Asia project, or E4C, which was just launched last year and was featured in a side event session earlier this week. We're focusing on improving gender equality in the energy sector by increasing the number of qualified women in the energy workforce, supporting more inclusive workplace environments, and increasing promotion and leadership opportunities for women. And we're actively looking for opportunities to partner with regional, local, and international institutions with similar goals. We know we have more impact when we support and build upon each other's efforts. And I very much look forward to the continued discussion today with our partners on this panel and making connections that will build our collective efforts to advance energy priorities in Southeast Asia and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda. Great to hear very tangible results coming out of some of these partnerships that USAID has had from dollars mobilized or megawatts put on the grid. It's exciting to hear those and look forward to hearing more about some of the work that RDMA has been doing. We'd now like to turn to Maria Gorobanci, the Managing Director for the Lower Mekong of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. My name is Maria Gorobanci, and I am DFC's Regional Managing Director for the Lower Mekong, based in Bangkok, Thailand. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC for short, is the U.S. government's development finance institution. DFC partners with private sector to finance solutions to the most critical challenges facing the developing world today, including supporting investment in climate finance. DFC invests across sectors including energy, healthcare, critical infrastructure, and technology. We have an active portfolio of about $31 billion across 150 emerging markets. Our primary focus is to invest in low-income and lower middle-income countries globally, with a priority on supporting developmental and commercially viable projects in Southeast Asia. As a development finance institution, DFC's tools to invest in emerging markets include debt financing, equity investments, investment funds, and political risk insurance. Technical development assistance, including feasibility studies, is only available for investments that are seeking DFC capital. DFC's partnerships in the energy sector include increasing energy access, expanding the development of advanced energy technologies, such as distributed energy resources, and support energy-centered solutions to climate change, including integrated gender mainstreaming and climate finance. DFC recognizes climate change as an urgent crisis whose impacts are often most severe in the developing world. DFC has adopted specific climate goals to achieve net zero emissions in its portfolio by 2040, focusing 1/3 of all new investments on climate by 2023. Partnerships with our fellow panelists are critical to ensure reliable energy access and ensuring that most vulnerable populations continue to have energy access, infrastructure stimulus, and also are provided the opportunity to improve recovery efforts and move forward economically given some of the impact of COVID-19. So how exactly is DFC prioritizing these partnerships with our fellow partners to address these energy and development goals? More broadly, DFC is sharing information and leveraging each of our institutional tools to work together to understand how we can each interface within the life cycle of a project to bring our tools to better ensure the sustainable development of energy investments across the spectrum of energy needs in ASEAN. Specifically, as Amanda and Director Steve Olive mentioned, USAID plays a critical role in supporting the regulatory environment to improve conditions that better facilitate the development of energy projects and foreign direct investment. DFC is working with USAID's implementing partners on the ground, for example, in the Lower Mekong and Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, to just name a few, and identifying ways that we can piggyback on much of the work that's been done on the regulatory enhancement and support developments of programs such as the Vietnam Direct Power Purchase Agreement by bringing complementary financing solutions through debt financing or de-risking projects financially. Similarly, we're working with our partners at DFAT, as well as Export Finance Australia, JICA, JPIC, and the Partners for Infrastructure by, again, sharing knowledge on these activities to improve the ecosystem overall. Together, crowding in our financing tools, whether they be from project preparation, feasibility study, to direct financing and equity tools, to address gaps and needs to ensure environmental social governance standards and contractual approaches are being met in accordance with international standards. And last but not least, we're also partnering with the Rockefeller Foundation, as was mentioned, specifically on a joint call for distributed renewable energy to spur applications for distributed renewable energy, particularly in more rural locations across Southeast Asia, Africa, and South Asia, who might be smaller in scale, but are just as important in terms of providing access to electricity and also to marginalized communities. And together with partners like Rockefeller Foundation are putting together a blended finance approach to address these needs to better mobilize private capital through development finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for that overview. It's great to hear all the partnerships that you have ongoing, and I was particularly struck by the climate goals that DFC has built into the energy strategy. So fantastic to hear those and look forward to seeing them implemented. We'll now turn to our representative from Japan, Toru Kobayakawa, the Deputy Director General for Energy and Mining Infrastructure Management Department of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA. Toru-san, please.
Thank you, Mark. This is Toru from JICA. Thank you for inviting me for this exciting event. Let me start with the brief introduction of JICA, what JICA does. JICA is an organization responsible for implementation of bilateral official development assistance under the government of Japan. We started our operations in early 1960s. Japan was striving for economic growth after the World War II, and we have tried to share our development experience with our partner countries, starting from our neighboring region, Asia and the Pacific. JICA provides various forms of assistance, such as technical cooperation, grant aid, concessional sovereign loan, private sector investment and finance, short-term trainings, scholarships, emergency relief, volunteers. So we have many items on our menu. We work with our partner countries for policymaking, sector-wise master planning, institutional development, capacity building, infrastructure development, etc. So in energy sector, we have three areas of focus. First, we focus on strengthening of network utilities. As you know, well-functioning network utilities are getting more and more important piece of power sector. And the share of variable renewable energy in the generation mix is increasing. The utilities will need to make huge investment on their network infrastructure. However, many utilities have fallen into a vicious cycle between lack of revenues and shortage of investment. Their governments need to create better environment where affordability of energy price and viability of network operations are well balanced. And the utilities need to exercise their better management on their infrastructure, financial and human resources. JICA has been closely working with the network utilities for better operations in many countries, and we will continue to do so. Secondly, integration of new and renewable energy to the existing system is another priority area. Moving toward net zero society is challenging, particularly for the Asia and Pacific region, where renewable energy resources are relatively scarce. A realistic and detailed energy transition pathways towards net zero targets need to be identified and implemented. JICA Japan will support our partner countries in delineating their energy transition roadmaps that ensures the optimal energy mix, satisfying the principle of 3E+S. 3E means environment, energy security, economic efficiency, and S means safety. We will also support implementation of the transition roadmaps through financial assistance to renewable energy integration. Geothermal energy is one of our focus for countries like Indonesia, which has potential for development. Facilitating innovation in clean energy field is also a critical area for cooperation. We continue to support Japanese and local universities through our science and research partnership program. Third area of focus is energy efficiency. Some Asian countries have been successful in attracting foreign direct investment and harness the industries that have driven their economic growth. Particularly some industries such as steel, cement, chemical are known to be energy intensive and emit significant amounts of CO2. Decarbonization of these industries are ultimate goals, but it would require further technology innovation. In short and medium term, it would be critical to improve their energy efficiencies in the industries so that they will not lose their international competitiveness. So Japanese industries have been seeking for higher material and energy efficiency for a long period. So we intend to support in partnership with the Japanese industries to utilize their expertise for saving energy consumption in the industries of the region. So in sum, we believe that it is important to have stronger network utilities than manage a transition to a new power sector with high share of renewable energy. Energy savings on the demand side is also a key factor for the successful energy transition. So we would like to, under this partnership with other donors and DFIs, we would like to engage in this promotion of energy transition in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Toru-san. Great to hear about the various focal areas that JICA is focusing on and how to engage with others as we move forward with this energy transition. So next, we're going to transition to the Australia government. First, we'll hear from Elena Rose, the Executive Director of Partnerships for Infrastructure, or P4I, at the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Elena, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to our ACEF organiser, ADB, and USAID for your initiative with this session today. As Mark said, my name is Elena Rose. I'm the Executive Director of Partnerships for Infrastructure and also with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, based here in Bangkok. I'm delighted to join this panel this morning and this evening for some viewers online, especially as this theme aligns with a particular passion of mine: enhancing collaboration to drive sustainable development. With the challenges at hand, it's all too easy to forget that each of us and our organisations are one very small part of a vast ecosystem that must work together to thrive. Now, this is particularly true as we face the urgent twin challenges that Steve identified of COVID-19 and of climate change. As governments across the region turn to infrastructure stimulus to drive recovery, this will present new opportunities to achieve a more sustainable energy future, but only if we plan and invest wisely. Australia's commitment to working with partners to realise these opportunities is enriched by two key areas of experience. First, our domestic experience. Australia's own rapid energy transition is a postcard from the global energy future. In 2020, we deployed renewable energy at 8 times the global average and more than 4 times the OECD average. And second, our long-standing engagement in the region and support for local leadership centred on ASEAN, which plays a vital role in identifying common priorities and guiding cooperation among us. Now, both of these areas of experience inform the new Australian program I lead, Partnerships for Infrastructure, which works bilaterally with Southeast Asian governments, regionally with ASEAN, and with many other like-minded partners. P4I offers a range of flexible tools and leverages Australia's deep domestic infrastructure expertise, including, as I mentioned, in our own rapid energy transition. Now, today, I would like to share a few brief examples of the partnerships Australia is forging, framed around 3 energy priorities, which I'm sure we'll hear a lot of from all of us on the panel: technology take-up, private investment, and the enabling environment. First, our governments are working together to accelerate the uptake of zero and low carbon technologies through partnerships like the Quad among Australia, the US, Japan, and India, which recently established a climate working group to advance low emissions technology. Mission Innovation, whose 22 member governments are accelerating the development of a global hydrogen market, and as a founding member of Australia is a founding member of the International Solar Alliance to rapidly scale solar technologies. Now, second, an immense lift is needed to catalyse private investment in clean energy. Asia's energy infrastructure gap is estimated at around US $135 billion. But to put this number in perspective, in 2019, global annual savings were around US 17 trillion and global capital markets at around US 218 trillion. Australia and our partners on the panel today are supporting innovative partnerships to ensure more of this private finance flows to where it is needed. For instance, through the Private Infrastructure Development Group, which has used US 4.4 billion to leverage some US 22.1 billion of private finance into projects, many of which are in energy, and the ADB-managed Australian Climate Finance Partnership. And as Maria mentioned, we have stepped up cooperation among export credit agencies through mechanisms like the Trilateral Infrastructure Partnership. Third, there will be no sustainable energy solution or achievement of SDG 7 without a concerted effort to strengthen enabling environments. Not only is governance pivotal for technology uptake and mobilising private finance, it will also determine whether the transition takes place at all, and if so, how. In other words, whether the transition is orderly, sustainable, and benefits all of us. Effective energy market governance underpins Australia's own domestic experience and is the central focus of our work in the region through initiatives like the new Global Power System Transformation Consortium, which provides end-to-end support to power system operators. New Australia Awards scholarships for policy and technology professionals across the region to study the energy transition and grid integration of renewables. And of course, P4I and our new Mekong Australia partnership, which offer regional governments flexible tools to help prepare for and navigate rapid change. I hope this snapshot of the partnerships Australia is forging to accelerate the low carbon transition reinforces the value of working together to amplify our impact. I look forward to discussing these and other partnerships with you all this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Elena, for those remarks, and great to see Australia taking such a presence with the deployment of renewable energies at 8 times the global average. That's fantastic to hear. I'll now turn to your colleague, John Hopkins, who's the Chief Risk Officer and General Counsel of the Export Finance Australia. John, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for moderating today. Thanks also to our hosts, ADB and USAID, and of course, my other panelists. Thank you. Look, I'm very pleased to be here today to talk to you about Export Finance Australia and the role that we can play in supporting the transition towards low carbon energy generation particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. And for those that don't know us, we're Australia's export credit agency, but I think we're not really a typical export credit agency focused solely on supporting Australian exporters. In addition to our traditional role, we also have a mandate to support the development of sustainable infrastructure projects in the Pacific, broader Indo-Pacific region, through the provision of commercial loans and guarantees. We're focusing our efforts across a range of countries at the present time, from Papua New Guinea to the Philippines, and a range of sectors, which includes telecommunications, water and sanitation, transportation, and importantly for this debate, green energy and electrification. And we do not necessarily need Australian content or involvement in infrastructure projects to be able to provide support. It's a little different to some of our sister agencies across the region. Instead, we take a much more flexible approach to assessing whether we can be involved in a project and therefore have a fairly wide remit. And a particular example of this recently is our support for US $32 million loan we provided as part of a broader $116 million package to build some onshore wind farms in Vietnam. The loan will help develop, construct and operate 3 wind farms located in the central highlands of Vietnam. The project will increase, pleasingly, Vietnam's wind power capacity by 30%, helping the country to meet its rapidly growing demand for energy. The syndicated loan was arranged by colleagues at ADB and involved finance from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, as well as a range of private lenders. The loan is also certified by the Climate Bond Initiative, which administers the International Climate Bond Standard and Certification Scheme. And for us particularly, it's a great example of how we can provide commercial finance to projects which support the low carbon transition into the region. Pleasingly, we're also working alongside trilateral infrastructure partners, as Elena mentioned earlier, the US and Japan. And we meet regularly with our US development finance colleagues and JBIC colleagues to discuss projects and opportunities. And unfortunately, while COVID has affected our ability to meet in person, we met virtually last October with the government officials in Vietnam to discuss how we could support the country's varied infrastructure needs, and look forward to continuing to work with our partners in the region to support the low carbon transition, and look forward to our continuing discussion today.
Thanks very much, John, and great to hear that concrete example of what you've done in Vietnam and how you've worked with Japan and others to help advance that wind farm and get it on the grid. We'll have one more panelist. Before we get to our last panelist, I would like to remind everyone in the audience to please submit questions in the Q&A box. We'll be getting to them later in our discussion this morning. We have gotten a few, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. And our last panelist, before we turn to our group discussion, we'll hear from Paripan Uvithia, the Director of Power and Climate at the Rockefeller Foundation. Khun Paripan, please.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, USAID and the Asian Development Bank and my co-panels. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paripan Uvithia. I lead the Power and Climate Initiative of the Rockefeller Foundation in Asia. Asian countries like Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and others have achieved electrification rate above 95% within the past 2 decades. It was indeed a century of stunning economic and social development. Also left many people out. But today, at least 1.5 billion people are energy poor, while most without any energy access are in Africa. Those with highly unreliable electricity are spread more widely, with a large number in Asia. The electric consumption, a proxy of poverty level, is consumed unevenly. People living in rural Bihar in India consume 20 times below national average. And despite progress in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, hundreds of millions of people in the region still do not have access to clean, reliable, and modern form of electricity. A lack of access to quality and reliable electricity leads to the community being left out of the development curve and cut off from the economy. The COVID-19 pandemic has made it fundamentally clear that vulnerable people and communities are the most at risk to global instability, be it from pandemics or the climate crisis. Yet, the current electrification approaches will make climate change worse. The good news is that distributed renewable energy technologies offer us the chance to build a new generation of infrastructure. Integrating flexible distributed renewable energy solutions, or DRE, to the grid infrastructures more quickly. This can unlock truly inclusive economic development and create a win-win in terms of a global energy transition. The technologies and scales of distributed renewable energies are diverse. It includes solar, wind, hydro, and even modern biogas. And these can be deployed at different scales. For example, mini-grids that serve small villages, or megawatt scale systems serving entire towns or islands, as in Indonesia. They could be deployed to power cold storage, agricultural processing, and even transportation, as well as larger captive systems for commercial and industrial clusters. DRE technologies can be installed and commissioned within 2 to 3 weeks. People do not have to wait for years for the grid to arrive. The combined mini-grid investment in countries with low level of electricity access in Africa and Asia is only about $5 billion compared to $220 billion needed to connect 500 million people by 2030. This investment will be even higher if a higher energy consumption is taken into account. As such, countries need to actively mobilize private sector investment. In the last 5 years, the Rockefeller Foundation and our partners have enabled over 500 operating mini-grids, reaching 500,000 people and over 15,000 enterprises in India, Myanmar, and Africa. We are ready to take this solution to scale. We will invest $500 million into the development of large-scale DRE projects to provide reliable, clean, productive energy to 1 billion energy poor people and reduce greenhouse gas emission up to 1 billion tons annually. As a philanthropic foundation, we have a great opportunity to bring the climate finance and development finance communities together, along with governments, private sector, and development partners to leapfrog out of the energy poverty and into a more inclusive economy. A partnership with USDFC to provide financing to DRE projects is a great example of how we work with other key actors. I'm also very proud with a partnership that we formed with the World Bank, GIC, USAID, commercial banks, power companies, and communities to build solar mini-grids projects in rural Myanmar. I'm excited to share that we will announce 2 other major partnerships this month. The first one will be tonight, and another partnership will be announced at the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy next week. I'd like to conclude that we must end energy poverty and transition to a climate-smart energy solution with urgency, like the way we combat COVID-19. And the fastest way to achieve this goal is through partnership.
Thank you, Khun Paripan, and great to hear those remarks and the work you're doing, with distributed renewable energy, with development of microgrids and other elements across the region. And thank you to all for your remarks and laying the foundation for the discussion that we'll transition to now. I'd like to remind the audience to submit questions in the box on your screen, and we'll pose them to the panelists to provide feedback. When you do submit questions, I'd request that you indicate which of the panelists that you would like to direct your question to. So with this, I'd like to open the discussion among the panelists here. posing a question to Japan, to the Rockefeller Foundation, and to Export Finance Australia initially about challenges to the clean energy transition. Looking at this transition, what challenges do countries typically face in accelerating the clean energy transition, and how can we work together to overcome those? And perhaps maybe Toru-san, I'll start with you from the JICA perspective.
Sure, thank you. I'll talk about the challenges for developing nations. Developing nations, one of the biggest challenges must be increasing energy demands due to their economic growth and population growth. As Paripan said, there are still many people lacking access to electricity in this region, and still nearly 1 billion people are experiencing frequent interruption in electricity supply. So the challenge is that the nations have to ensure stable energy supply to increasing demands while making energy transitions. So investment needs for energy-related infrastructure, not only renewables, but also transmission and distribution network infrastructure would be much larger for net zero scenario than BAU scenario. And also another challenge is I can think of is uncertainties. There are lots of uncertainties like availability of finance resources or availability of necessary materials such as critical minerals, or uncertainties related to technology development. So there are so many uncertainties. So we have to try to remove these uncertainties as much as possible. So what we can do is first we can come up with a long-term detailed transition roadmaps to reduce uncertainty. And it should come along with a proper investment plan that clearly indicates which subsectors require more investment. And we also need to provide financial assistance during the implementation. Institutional support for attracting private investment is another thing we can do. Capacity building for utilities would be also important for enabling them to financially making investments by their own resources. So these are what I can think of.
Great, thanks, Toru-san. And building on your last point there, specifically on attracting financing, maybe John, I'll build on that with a question to you as far as looking at these challenges. What barriers are you seeing to attracting greater investment into the renewable energy space?
Look, thank you, Toru-san, for your comments. I think you articulated some of the issues pretty clearly. I think, look, some of the barriers from our perspective are the lack of private financing in the sector. I think for us, that goes a long way to explaining how we're able to help in sort of possibly de-risking some of these projects and removing some of the uncertainty that goes into these projects. Often with our participation, our flexible mandates, our approach to financing allows us to take more riskier parts of financing, and which then allows private sector contributions, which are more compatible to a commercial financing sort of regime. Clearly, we play a role like that, and I can give you the example of our wind farms in Vietnam. We took a riskier piece of the financing than was offered by the commercial financing agencies that were involved. So I think from our perspective, it is really about bringing that extra piece into a broader financing package.
Excellent, thanks. And from that, I'd also like to build on Toru-san's first point about stable energy supply and building that to meet demand. And with that, I'll turn to Khun Paripan to get your point of view on how regional and global actors can work together to help support this needs as far as distributed renewable energy to meet some of this demand. How can they get involved?
Thank you, Mark, for that question. Well, let me first tell you about how we turn a partnership into action so that it's more concrete to the audience. And I'll begin with the story in southern Myanmar, where we work together with many other partners. So this is a story about the fishery business that has 120 workers. So it's no small business. They harvest and prepare fresh cockle, which is a popular dish in Thailand and many other places in Southeast Asia. But without grid connection, This fishery micro business purchased electricity from the owner of a diesel generator, $1.40 for 4 hours a day. This is only enough to power small appliances and light for a few hours each day. It also spent another $2 on fuel for a diesel pump used for washing the catch. The island does not have a cold storage. As you can imagine how that will be in terms of food waste. Since the fishery business has been connected to the mini-grid, a solar mini-grid on the island, it benefited so much from reduced cost, increased productivity, and higher orders. The energy bill is reduced by 60%. And a cold storage was set up on the island after the power is available. Like, this is one of 500,000 stories that we and our partners have positively impacted. We can work together, to bend this electrification curve. And it's not either, the choice of renewable energy solutions at scales, but also looking at routification. It can be brought together into one play. And so what can really the actors do? I would say we'll touch on 3 things. First, we need to have tailored country programs. There's been programs that are sort of scattered and fragmented. So the point here, I think, is to work with really partners to come together with strong government partnerships and a group of experts to support the capacities and policy needed to grow the distributed renewable energy sector. Alongside that, we need to design, pilot, and align the public subsidy programs backed by bilaterals and multilateral organizations, many of them on this panel. And second, we need to work with our partners to create a pipeline of high potential projects and transactions. Maria talked about working together to support smaller projects that are in rural communities. But these projects can also be bundled into a very large portfolio that's quite attractive. And so, together with other partners, we could work together to provide debt, equity, and guarantees, and create a pool blended capital approach. And finally, we need to work together to bring together global advocacy based on world-class data that's generated by us, by our partners, and many more, and knowledge that strengthens the evidence base on the best solutions. Thank you, Mark.
Great, thanks, Khun Paripan, for that feedback on that question. I'd now like to turn to sort of the role of governments and policies in this process, and I'll direct this question to representatives from DFAT, USAID, and JICA from your government's point of view of what role can and should governments be playing to ensure and accelerate an orderly low carbon transition? What kind of policy instruments are needed for this? And then also, can you give, looking at the various partnerships that you have either within yourselves or with others, can you give examples of regional cooperation activities that can help support climate change that you've seen? So maybe Elena, start with you.
Thanks, Mark. So just as in moments of crises, I think in times of transition and transformation, governments have an even more important and visible role to play. I think first around enabling and driving longer term planning to guide reforms and an orderly transition, as we heard from Toru on the last question. Such planning integrates evidence, identifies clear outcomes and maps change pathways, but it's not easy. And the alternative is a piecemeal approach that is unlikely to make the most of the opportunities. Australia's creation of the national electricity market, which is one of the world's longest interconnected power systems, and more recently, our review into the future security of the national electricity market provide 2 good examples. These and other reform efforts have facilitated competitive market structures that increase private sector investment and innovation in our energy sector. Second, I think strengthening governance arrangements has to include clarifying and optimising accountabilities and mandates among energy market bodies. It's something we've done with the Australian Energy Market Operator in Australia, and it's something we're doing throughout the region with partners like Vietnam. Now, as I noted earlier, governments must also take action to accelerate innovation and drive down the green premium. that is the price differential between incumbent technologies and low or zero carbon solutions. This can help uptake in developing countries. And the Australian government's significant investment in developing a clean, innovative, safe and competitive hydrogen industry is one such example, as is our contribution globally in this area. And finally, I think governments are uniquely positioned to bring together diverse stakeholders and incentivise collaboration and knowledge sharing. This is why, for instance, Australia partnered last year with Thailand to co-host the Mekong Australia Policy Dialogue on Energy and Electricity Futures. In terms of your question, Mark, about examples, so I think first example I'd give is Partnerships for Infrastructure, a relatively new initiative, but what we're aiming to do is make sure that disaster risk reduction and climate change are integrated across all aspects of infrastructure work that we do with partners in the region. I think this is fundamental. Another one is the Australian Climate Finance Partnership, which is managed by the ADB and aims to stimulate private investment into supporting climate change initiatives. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Elena, and thanks for building in those examples there at the end. I think good, real, tangible things to look at for how this can be seen in real life. Amanda, over to you for your thoughts on the role of government policies.
Thanks, Mark. I mean, from the USAID perspective, we know that partner countries don't have necessarily sufficient funds to fully implement their nationally determined contributions. And as they are planning for those leading up to this year's COP, I think this is an opportune moment for us to all kind of take a step back and think through those commitments. And one of our jobs at USAID is to help them unlock the necessary private investment to help implement those commitments through our technical assistance, policy reform efforts, and our relationships with private sector actors and partnerships. And we and other development partners who are featured here today and elsewhere are working to help our partner countries become even more attractive for private sector investment. I'll talk a bit about some of work USAID has done globally to rapidly scale renewable energy. USAID has been helping countries like India, Kazakhstan, Laos, Colombia, and Zambia develop policy and regulatory and business environments to expand renewable energy through competitive energy auctions. And auctions will provide incentives for investment by offering stable long-term contracts to generators who can in turn compete to deliver the lowest price. This competitive, transparent process can help countries meet their energy goals and also attract additional private investment. USAID has provided technical assistance to support this process, and a good example of this can be demonstrated through our recent work in both Colombia and in Laos, where we looked to replicate success across the globe. So in Colombia, USAID supported the first ever renewable energy auction by working closely with the government to prepare the draft and final policy documents and corresponding regulations. Colombia's auction is leveraging $2 billion in expected private investment for new large-scale renewable energy plants towards government agencies seeking to build more resilient infrastructure. And similarly, in Laos, USAID is working with the Ministry of Energy and Mines to implement the country's first ever solar auction, and we provided assistance in site selection, drafting of auction announcement packages and technical standards and grid connection requirements. Bidding is expected to take place later this year, and we're looking forward to seeing many private sector partners participate in this initiative. So I think as we talk about and address and start to think through the nexus of renewable energy deployment and climate change, there are even more opportunities for us as development partners to help bring the private sector to the table and provide additional support and investment to help achieve climate change goals. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks for highlighting the private sector component there. Certainly an area we'll be coming back to. At this point, Torreson, I'd like to turn to you for your thoughts on the role of the government in this process.
Sure. Sorry, today somehow my network is unstable, so forgive me if I can't complete my sentence. But for government, what needs to be done? I think formulation of energy transition roadmap is important, as I said. For example, if we look at the ADB's draft energy policy paper, it puts several conditions for financing natural gas projects. One of the conditions is alignment with the targets to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century. So government needs to come up with any kind of roadmap so that you ensure you're aligned with this carbon neutrality. And the more direct policy interventions, proper energy pricing would be another important area. Cost reflecting the pricing of electricity must be important to reduce government subsidies and help the utilities make necessary infrastructure investment. Taxation and subsidies would be essential policy tools to guide the nation's energy transition. And for the partnership example, as Steve mentioned in his opening remarks, we have a partnership with the US, JUMP, in the Lower Mekong area. And that partnership intends to promote more sustainable energy sectors, including regional power trade and integration. And if that is successful, as you know, Laos is endowed with the hydropower, that which is clean. So if Laos can export clean energy to the neighboring countries, that will be good for successful transition of energy sectors in this Lower Mekong region. And another example is that a partnership with 4 countries, US, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. We have a partnership in PNG for electrification. And we, under that partnership, we promote, we support PNG to facilitate rural electrification in their country by utilizing cleaner energies. So this kind of collective efforts will move ahead our partner countries' successful energy transition. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for those thoughts. And of course, really the role of the government and policies there is really only one component of the equation. And Amanda referenced this in her remarks. The private sector is going to become critical for helping advance this clean energy transition and zero carbon transition as well. So I'd like to put this next question to Maria from DFC and Elena as well. And that we all recognize that the private sector is critical to fostering the future and a clean and renewable future for all. So what more can governments and the international partners do to increase the private investment in this region's clean energy transition? Maybe Maria, first I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Mark. I think some of these items have already been alluded to by other panelists, but I think critical to facilitating private sector investment in these markets is driven primarily, one, by regulatory changes to facilitate the needed requirements. So that includes things like de-risking the environment to provide and crowd in private sector financing, whether it be local financing or foreign investment from abroad. Secondly, items such as ensuring some level of standards, including environmental social governance standards that are applicable to internationally recognized standards, such as the IFC performance standards, are key in terms of building momentum, because I think some of the challenges we're seeing in these markets is that there is a deep interest and a deep need, given the infrastructure and energy demand and also the population growth in ASEAN. But often it might be done on an ad hoc basis, and so their scalability is an issue. And then another key area of focus is also integrating within the rubric of contracting approaches that factor in an equitable risk allocation among parties. So the reason that's relevant is that in order to really build sustainable financing and attract this requisite financing that's required, whether it be a blended finance approach or a strictly commercial approach, I think there's a recognition that the contracting structures, whether it be PPPs or power purchase agreements or some sort of, or a BOT approach, et cetera, needs to be done in a way that provides ample risk allocation for all parties, and the risk isn't just being solely allocated to one partner or disproportionately to one partner, which I think not only eats in time to the financing and the development of said project, but also I think impairs really investor willingness to come into the market, and can sometimes signal a cautionary tale to investors, perhaps who are not from the local market. So those are, I think, some key areas that we can continue to work on together, and we're doing a lot of work on as well.
Great, thanks. Elena, over to you for your thoughts.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you, Maria. So it is a really good question and a common theme today. I do wonder whether I should be responding or rather listening to others, including those from the private sector. I think we in government have a really important task ahead of us in terms of better linking the work that we do in partnership and across the region with the private sector's needs and perspectives. And organisations like DFC and EFA and others are also uniquely positioned to help with that. Initiatives like Australia's Partnerships for Infrastructure and the ADB's Asia Pacific Project Preparation Facility, which we also co-fund, can also help in this regard. They can help governments by better understanding and integrating private sector needs into robust upstream policy planning and project preparation. All too often, I think, in development programs, we undertake these upstream activities without enough insight and involvement from private sector actors to really determine what the root problem is and the root constraints that we need to address. Additionally, Australia is engaging and working very closely with business at home and abroad on the opportunities in shifting towards net zero economies, including, for instance, job creation, economic diversification, and ways to enhance business profitability through low emissions technology. By way of example, I think many and a growing number of Australian businesses now consider net zero opportunities to be key to their future competitiveness. And it's exactly this kind of perception and thinking that we need to work to develop. And as I said earlier, and many of us have spoken about, it's really important that we continue to push the bar on ways to crowd in private investment. John noted that a big part of this is really about how we understand, allocate and mitigate risk. And I really love the private infrastructure development group's aim to be risk aware as opposed to risk averse. It's great, but at the same time, I think we need to really recognise that PIDGE can and is able to be a first mover because it combines donor funding with a robust approach and great expertise to reassure private investors. Backing it and other pathfinding organisations, and also EFA and DFC in these kinds of initiatives is an obvious way to increase private investment and recycle or even grow our own investments. Thanks, Mark.
Excellent, thanks. And this leads, I think, directly into a question that we received from the audience here about sort of the limited funding that may be available and really targeting private sector to help advance some of these things. But as countries and governments look to advance along this clean energy transition with limited funding, where should those limited resources be programmed from your points of view and your organization's point of view, from a distributed renewable energy or more mainstream renewable energy? In order to maintain this sort of 1.5 degree goal, should it be focused more on these larger programs or more on the smaller off-grid types of activities on the DRE side? So maybe John and Paripan, I'll put this to you. From your perspective in your organizations, where are you looking to sort of get involved primarily? Is it at this DRE level or more the mainstream renewables? John?
I'm happy to take the first part of the question. Look, I think from our perspective, it's really a country by country question. I think, for example, if you look at a market that we're very close to, Papua New Guinea, there are a diverse range of energy needs in those particular markets, which can be satisfied by smaller projects, but also much larger projects. So for me, there's not one bespoke solution there's not one solution. It's more a bespoke solution that's probably a mix of both options.
Great. Khun Paripan, thoughts from you?
I agree with John there. And look, I think yes, there's limited finance available, but it's also how this finance is deployed to unlock public and private capital, which, and as there's trillions of private capitals out there that are looking to be deployed in these projects, but quite often the projects are not structured in a way that allow their participation. So I would say that I think it shouldn't be either or. It should be both, ideally, and it's not okay, I think, to lead people out of the modern form of electricity. But I think the goal of roadification and carbon emission reduction can also be met through an integrated and concerted efforts. So focused on pooling capital to unlock the capital needed, focused on making the business model for DRE that are more attractive by driving down the capital cost of the systems, which would in any way benefit from the growing sector of the larger megawatt scales of solar utilities. But again, we're looking to support projects that are up to 100 megawatt. And that is something that we would certainly work with utilities. Finally, I would say that utility companies that are doing megawatt scales are now looking to do both also distributed projects, because in some places, like John said, it doesn't make sense to extend the grid or just set up a larger systems on its own. So there is now this momentum behind the private sectors, utilities, and state utilities that are looking to integrate distributed renewable energy as part of the solution. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Thanks for that. And I think, yes, critical to look at the country's needs and craft a solution to that. I do want to get back to a question of partnerships, and Amanda, maybe I'll start with you. And this was mentioned in the opening remarks from Steve, as well as I know you and Maria referenced it as well. But the U.S. government launched their Asia Enhancing Development and Growth Through Energy initiative, or Asia Edge, not too long ago. Can you explain USAID's role within this whole of government effort? And are there specific areas of focus that USAID has targeted within the energy sector to really help address some of these needs that we're seeing in the region?
Thanks, Mark. I can talk a bit more about Asia Edge. So throughout this region, our support for a sustainable and secure energy future is wide-ranging, but it can be categorized into 4 main technical pillars under our Asia Edge broader umbrella, which is utility modernization, increasing the deployment of advanced energy technologies, promoting and supporting transparent best value procurements, and regional energy trade and integration. On the first pillar on utility modernization, we're working with utility partners to help them transition into a more viable utility structure and helping them identify financing vehicles that can better incentivize modernization. We also support long-term planning and efficient integration of transformative technologies, including battery energy storage, smart grids, electric vehicles, and energy efficient products and practices. And I would say there, especially in this region with the demand for air conditioning and cooling, a focus on energy efficiency, I think, is critical now and going forward, as well as how that helps to contribute to broader climate change goals. As I noted in my earlier comment, we're also working with countries to build attractive enabling environments for business and funding programs that are promoting legal, regulatory, and policy reforms. And this is including opening up and helping to support transparent and best value procurement practices, which will help level the playing field for international businesses. And on the last pillar, we're helping to advance legal and regulatory frameworks that can enable power and gas trade and the development of power markets, including regional power exchanges. And we talked a bit about in Steve's remarks about our support to the ASEAN Center for Energy and the work that we've been doing over the past several years on the ASEAN Interconnection Master Planning Study. I'd like to also emphasize that for us to realize sustainable energy growth, we must work to implement environmental and social safeguards, referring back to what Maria also mentioned with respect to our investments, and we're doing that through our USAID Mekong Safeguards program. So we're looking at kind of the entire ecosystem and ways that USAID can help support an enabling environment that will help to open up markets for all players that want to be engaged here to help crowd in additional financing for critical infrastructure and energy projects.
Thanks, Amanda. And sort of building from that, I'd like to turn to Toru-san for his perspective on from JICA as far as sort of technical areas that JICA expects partners to collaborate with, and maybe give an example or two of how that's worked. At the same time, also addressing a question that's come in from the audience as far as how to potentially reconcile, conflicting policies or problems within a country or a government, and how to reconcile that with your organization's priorities and what you're trying to do in the market. So Toru-san, maybe some thoughts from you?
Sure, thank you, Mark. About this partnership example, what I can say is our partnership. I have already given you an example for partnership with the US. In addition to JUMP, we have a JUSEP, Japan-US Clean Energy Partnership, that promotes open and competitive, transparent energy markets to accelerate integration of cleaner energy into modernize the grid. So this aim is completely overlaps with come along with our technical areas of focus, and so we think the areas we can strengthen for our partnership with the other donors would be sharing transition roadmaps, facilitation of regional power trade, promotion of open and transparent energy markets, development of network infrastructure. So these are the technical areas for the collaboration I can think of. And for this questions about reconciliation, that is a quite challenging this question. I think in every country, it is not easy to make in one voice, and donors have to stand by with the partner government organizations' decisions. But in case political commitment, political leadership is there, that will be relatively easier to come into the to come up with a clear, detailed transition roadmaps, plans in the energy sector. So we will try to support the partner countries' government planning process. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for those remarks, Toru-san. Certainly, yes, getting the political commitment there is critical to ensuring that some of these partnerships go forward and the policies and priorities are advanced. Building from that, Maria, I'd like to turn to you along this lines and inquire about how DFC typically partners with other organizations to advance these priorities, and in what ways does DFC value these regional partnerships to advance the region's priorities?
So we typically partner with a variety of with the panelists, as we've talked about, in a variety of ways. So given the markets where we work and the distinctive demands of those markets, both from an energy perspective need and also demographics and risk profile, as one can appreciate, nothing we do is cookie cutter. So I think what we try to do is looking to leverage our partnerships with other DFIs, other partners, philanthropic partnerships like the Rockefeller Foundation, and governments like USAID, DFAT, the Japanese, to basically bring in our tools so that we can intervene at various points within the life cycle of a project or an investment. The reason being is that DFC is, as I mentioned, a development finance institution of the US government, and our principal tools are financing solutions. And so in order for us to come in, we really need to be able to identify standalone projects, whether it be a standalone project or an investment fund that we can support with our financing tools that are both commercially viable and developmental, and then work with our partners to assess how perhaps their tool set can either augment or complement what we may be able to add, and vice versa, so that there is with the end goal being that there be a sustainable development of energy sector investment in these markets, and so that there's a seamless really kind of connection between regulatory improvement and standardization of financial, legal, and commercial requirements to investment, whether that be, again, commercial or blended approach, as well as to building upon that and ensuring that there's really knowledge transfer, inclusivity of access to electricity or access to clean energy, and building upon that so that, you know, we don't just we provide a long-term solution to the challenges in the market and a sustained relationship.
Thanks, Maria. Appreciate that. I'd like to turn now to a question that we received from the audience from PFAN, the Private Financing Advisory Network. They mentioned they've got a large pipeline of projects across Asia that are put forward for coaching, investment facilitation for clean energy and climate change or climate tech companies. So how would some of these companies access funding in a sort of a $1 to $10 million range to help businesses grow, access that funding from DFC and potentially a credit guarantee provided by Rockefeller Foundation? So maybe start again back to you, Maria, to see how somebody could potentially access these funds to help support their growth.
Thank you, Mark. And just to clarify, is the question related to the distributed renewable energy call for applications, or is it more general?
I believe it's more general. The question does not specify the call for DRE.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So thank you to those who asked that question. I think from DFC's perspective, we certainly can support projects that are large or small. So, we're investing in large renewable energy projects or also smaller distributed renewable energy, microgrid, solar grid, also smaller scale clean finance projects that might have battery storage components to them as well, with proven technology. If you have something of interest, I would say two things. First, I encourage you to look at our website at www.dfc.gov. But in essence, our key gating criteria to determine whether your investment or project might be eligible is threefold. One, is it in a country where DFC is open for business in ASEAN? The countries are listed on our website. I'm also happy to speak to you directly if of interest. Secondly, does the project have a developer or sponsor who has expertise in this area and has done this either in other markets or elsewhere in that country of interest? And then thirdly, is there a business plan that you could share with us to further assess whether or not it would be something that we could support? I think those are the three really gating items. And as I mentioned, I'm also happy to talk to this individual or group of individuals offline. Welcome you to reach out to me directly or also to check out our website first. And I'll hand it over back to you, Mark.
Excellent. And if I may pass directly back to Kun Paripan to address maybe the potential for credit guarantees that may be available from Rockefeller.
I just want to build on Maria's points that the instruments that we have, it's grant, recoverable grant, and non-recoverable grant, as well as financing, which comes in the form of debt, equity, and guarantee. And we do deploy these tools in partnership with other lenders and co-investors. Type of projects that we typically looked at and will be considering more of are three things. One, that are a mini-grid in nature, so solar mini-grids or any other renewable energy technologies that are scalable and not just a couple of pilots that are on the ground. And two would be distributed renewable energy solutions that can help improve grid reliabilities, be it sort of the last miles or in the communities that are far away from the generation source. And third, mini-grid or distributed grid solutions that can power clusters of industrials or markets that do not have access to reliability power that they need. our footprint is in India and Myanmar, but we're increasingly interested in Indonesia and the Philippines, as well as Bangladesh and Nepal. So I'll leave that with you, Peter, and thanks for that question.
And finally, Elena, I know you have some thoughts on this as well, so I'll turn to you.
Thanks, Mark. I'll be very quick as I know we're running short of time and there's still a few interesting questions to go. So I did just want to encourage PFAN and others on the line to take a look at the Indo-Pacific Design Funding window that is currently open with Convergence that Australia, through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, is funding. I think that's open to the 20th of July. And it does provide grant funding for the design and launch of catalytic blended finance solutions in certain countries across the Indo-Pacific. So not sure if that, responds to directly what you're after for colleagues from PFAN, but hopefully it will create some opportunities for those listening in today. Thanks.
Thanks, Elena, for that as well. I'd like to bring up another question that came in from the audience, and I'd encourage any of you who are involved with transport and mitigating transport emissions to chime in here. There's a question as far as whether the group would have an interest in mitigating existing transport emissions by 50% in an effort to bridge transport emissions until the eventual integration of EVs into the sector, which according to the IEA should occur in the next 2 to 3 decades. So thoughts on your organization's views or activities toward supporting transportation emission reduction and or EVs in the region?
Mark, maybe I can start if that's helpful quickly. I think in principle, yes, this is something that aligns with DFC's climate resilience and climate targets that I alluded to at the top of the webinar today. Again, I think the question, though, is not, we could certainly support it more generally, but in terms of how we can provide specific financing solutions, we would need to have, again, a specific investment to assess as to whether and how we can support, whether it be a corporation or a project to transition from their existing transportation solution to a greener EV solution or a lower carbon emission footprint. And just develop something that's, bankable and developmental. So again, just to sum up, I think it certainly aligns with DFC's overall objectives. I think the question then becomes is how do we define the scope or parameters of the investment in particular to determine how we can best support you in those endeavors.
Mark, I'm happy to chime in too. And in a similar vein, I think we would look for a bankable project. From our perspective, we're looking for something that's commercially viable, but there's a broad spectrum there for us. And the project would obviously need to meet relevant social and environmental standards and again, be appropriate for the host country. We're not looking for white elephants. And also there needs to be sound procurement governance around the project. So from a basic level, they're the kind of things that we're Export Finance Australia looking for.
Excellent, thanks. And I know we've got about 7 minutes left. So if there are additional questions from the audience, please continue to send them in. We'll get to them as soon as we can. I'd like to put the next question to Toru-san and Amanda on innovation, and recognizing that I think everyone would agree that innovation is going to be one of the keys to addressing the challenges toward clean energy transition. So what are your governments doing to harness the power of new and emerging technologies and help accelerate a sustainable economic recovery from COVID, reduce emissions and foster more resilient economies? And along those lines, there's a question that just came in a few moments ago about is there interest from any of the organizations as far as financing a pilot project or supporting a pilot project for a novel water to hydrogen production technology type of activity? So maybe, Amanda, I'll turn to you and your thoughts on innovation and USAID's view toward that.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Here at USAID, we are excited and we're passionate about embracing new technologies and models of development. And as I mentioned under Asia Edge, it's one of our specific pillars is promoting and supporting the advancement of advanced energy technologies in the region. So we're always looking for more collaborators to help us identify emerging problems, to help scale up renewable energy, and we welcome co-investments on innovative solutions, pilot projects, and business models. And we have some success stories to share on this front. For example, as Steve mentioned in his opening remarks, in Vietnam, we've been working with the Ministry of Industry and Trade to implement a renewable energy direct power purchase agreement, or DPPA mechanism. And that mechanism will allow power consumers to contract directly with renewable energy developers. And we're pleased to be partnering with a lot of companies in Vietnam on this, including American business leaders like Apple, Nike, and GE. And here in Thailand, we've been supporting the Office of the Regulatory Commission in its development of battery energy storage system technical standards, and have been sharing disruptive technologies regulatory experience from the US to help Thailand with its clean energy transition. And I will say, from the previous comments and questions on EVs, obviously EVs are of great interest both in the United States and in this region, as we're seeing car companies making big announcements about moving from combustion engines to full EV fleets in the very foreseeable future. So, and we're definitely seeing an interest here in Thailand and beyond in the region in helping to develop an ecosystem that will allow for these vehicles to thrive. So we are very much supportive of those efforts and want to be able to support those efforts as they move forward. And additionally, as I mentioned earlier, we released a new version of the Renewable Energy Data Explorer under our partnership with the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is a publicly available geospatial analysis tool that can help inform renewable energy policy, investment, and deployment decisions. And the advanced version of this tool also includes solar data sets for all of Southeast Asia. And that was developed in collaboration with and utilizing data imagery from Japan's Himawari satellite, which we're very excited about. So those are just a few of the examples. But in general, we're happy to have conversations and identify new opportunities to advance technologies in the region.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Toru-san, over to you.
Sure. In the context of international cooperation, we have Science and Research Partnership Program. Through this program, we financially support Japanese universities collaborating with local universities in developing countries. So in the field of low carbon technology, we have supported more than 20 projects across the board. This includes ocean thermal energy conversion in Malaysia, CCUS in Indonesia, conversion of biomass waste to biofuels in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. So we also work on human resource development in local academia and in industries in these projects. In many developing countries, collaborations among government, academia, and industries are still weak, mainly due to budgetary limitations. So governments are expected to lead collaborations among these parties, and we will support for these efforts. Back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Toru-san. And we've got about just under 2 minutes left to go. And so maybe this last question I'll put to John, a question from the audience that came in about the reference you made to offshore wind farm that you supported in central Vietnam. The question was, could you share your views on key steps that the Vietnamese government needs to undertake to accelerate renewable energy development, particularly offshore wind in Vietnam?
Look, I don't think it relates specifically to that transaction, though it certainly helps. But prior to us entering into the transaction, we entered into a dialogue with the Vietnamese government through the Trilateral Infrastructure Partnership. So I think that was indicative of the Vietnamese government being very open to ideas expressed by the Australian, Japanese, and US governments around how we could invest in Vietnam. And I think that's a really good example of the kind of dialogue that's required, particularly as some of the earlier conversations have talked about how you make a project bankable, what the regulatory environment needs to be in order to support these particular projects, and what the particular development needs are for the country in question. So again, we don't want to be financing projects that don't actually work for the nation who we're trying to assist or who we want to get an investment return back from. So I think there's a certain degree of openness required from governments where there's an exchange of information between both the financing parties and the governments to make sure that it's a mutually beneficial outcome rather than an outcome that benefits one side over the other.
Great. Thanks for that, John, and thanks to all the panelists for your participation and for your comments. This wraps up our time together and wraps up the Q&A session. I'd like to thank all of my panelists who joined me today for an active and lively discussion. I hope that all of the attendees have been able to come away from this session with a better understanding of how you can tap into some of these partnerships and how these partnerships are working to help accelerate the clean energy partnership and low carbon transition across the Asia Pacific. Of course, we only touched on today what is a brief representation of all the work that's happening across the region. So as we wrap up, I'd ask that you all take the time to provide your feedback on the session in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Your responses will be very useful to our panelists as well as to ADB. So thank you again to all of our panelists who joined this morning, and thanks to all of you. I wish you a successful remainder of the forum. Thank you very much.